It all started with a phone call I never expected. As a doctor, my life had always been focused on saving lives, no matter how challenging the case. But nothing could have prepared me for the call I received that day. It was from an official, someone high up in a government department I had never heard of, and they were asking for my help in a way that sounded impossible. They didn't explain much at first, only that a situation had arisen involving a critically injured patient. The request was urgent, and they said I was the only one qualified for the procedure. But there was a catch. The patient wasn't human. Before I could even process the information, I was escorted to a secretive government facility deep underground, where I was briefed on the specifics. The patient I was being asked to save wasn't just any alien. She was the queen of a distant empire, a powerful ruler who had been grievously wounded in a conflict that Earth was only now learning about. Her name was Queen Lyara of the Eslor Empire. An empire so vast and powerful, it stretched across entire galaxies, with Earth being one of the smallest, most insignificant planets on its fringes. But now Earth was being pulled into the Eslor's cosmic politics, and I was at the center of it all. Queen Lyara had been attacked during a skirmish with a rival faction. Her injuries were beyond what her own alien doctors could handle, and that's why I had been summoned. The Eslor had advanced technology beyond anything we humans could dream of, but their biology was different. So different, in fact, that the injuries she had sustained were proving impossible for their medics to treat. They needed someone who could think outside the confines of their medical systems, someone who could adapt. And somehow, that person was me. I had never performed surgery on an alien before. I had never even seen an alien before. Yet, as I stood in front of the Queen's medical pod, looking at her for the first time, I realized just how monumental this task was. Queen Lyara lay unconscious, her form delicate yet commanding. She had a regal air, even in her weakened state, and her skin shimmered faintly, a soft silver hue that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly light. Her advisors, tall, imposing beings with piercing eyes, stood at a distance, watching me closely. They didn't trust me, and why should they? To them I was an outsider, an Earth doctor with no knowledge of their species or their ways. But they had no other choice. The surgery I was about to perform wasn't just about saving a life. It was about preventing catastrophe. Queen Lyara's death would plunge her empire into chaos, a chaos that would ripple across galaxies and inevitably reach Earth. My hands weren't just holding her life. They were holding the fate of entire worlds. As I prepared for the surgery, I tried to block out the enormity of what I was doing. I focused on the task at hand, on the delicate steps I would need to take to repair the damage to her body. My mind was racing, but I couldn't afford to make a mistake. I started the procedure, my heart pounding in my chest as I made the first incision. The Queen's alien physiology was unlike anything I had studied. But I had done my research, combing through every bit of information the Eslor scientists had provided me. Her body was a puzzle, one I was determined to solve. As I worked, the room was eerily silent. The Eslor advisors watched from the shadows, their eyes never leaving me. I felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on me, but I pushed forward, my hands steady, my mind focused. Hours passed, and the surgery became more complex than I had anticipated. Her organs were fragile, her blood different from anything I had seen before. But I adapted, using every bit of my medical training to keep her alive. There were moments when I wasn't sure if she would make it, moments when her vitals dropped dangerously low. But I refused to give up. And then, finally, after what felt like an eternity, it was done. The surgery was over, and Queen Lyara was stable. I stood back, wiping the sweat from my brow, my hands still trembling from the intensity of the operation. I had done it. I had saved the life of an alien queen, something I never imagined would be part of my career as a doctor. The Eslor advisors, who had been watching me so closely, stepped forward. Their eyes no longer held the suspicion I had seen earlier. Instead, there was something else, a sense of respect, maybe even gratitude. One of them, a tall figure dressed in elaborate robes, spoke in a language I couldn't understand. Another translated. "You have saved our queen's life," he said, his voice deep and solemn. "For that, we owe you a great debt." I didn't know how to respond. I wasn't looking for gratitude or rewards. I had simply done what I was trained to do, save lives. But the gravity of the situation was beginning to sink in. This wasn't just any patient. This was the ruler of an empire so vast and powerful that its influence stretched across galaxies. And now, because of me, she was still alive. As they carefully moved Queen Lyara to a recovery chamber, I couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. Would they take her back to her home planet? Would I ever see her again? Or had my role in this extraordinary event come to an end? The answer came sooner than I expected. Days passed, and I was kept in the government facility, unable to return to my normal life. I understood why. They couldn't risk me talking about what had happened. The existence of the Eslor and their queen was still a closely guarded secret, one that Earth wasn't ready to learn about just yet. But during that time, I received updates on Queen Lyara's condition. She was recovering well, far better than anyone had expected. And then, one day, I was summoned to her chamber. I had assumed that the queen would be kept isolated, far away from me, the human doctor who had saved her life. But when I entered the chamber, I was surprised to find her sitting up, her silver skin glowing softly in the dim light. "Doctor," she said, her voice smooth and melodic, yet carrying the weight of authority. "I owe you my life." I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to address a queen from another world. "Your Majesty," I began, but she raised a hand to stop me. "Lyara," she corrected. "Here, you may call me Lyara." Her gaze was piercing, but there was a warmth in her eyes that I hadn't expected. I sat down across from her, feeling the oddness of the situation. Here I was, a human doctor, sitting in front of an alien queen who had more power than I could comprehend. "You saved me," she said again, her tone softer this time. "But you did more than that. You showed me something I hadn't seen in a long time, compassion." Her words surprised me. "I was just doing my job," I said, feeling slightly uncomfortable with the praise. Lyara smiled, a small, knowing smile. "Perhaps, but you did it with care, with kindness. That is something my people have lost over time. In our quest for power, we have forgotten what it means to be vulnerable." I didn't know what to say. I hadn't expected this kind of conversation. But as Lyara spoke, I realized that her near-death experience had changed her. She wasn't just a ruler anymore. She was a person who had faced mortality and come out the other side. As we talked, I found myself drawn to her in ways I hadn't expected. She was wise, intelligent, and thoughtful, but there was also a sadness in her, a loneliness that came from the weight of her responsibilities. I could see it in the way she spoke, in the way her gaze sometimes drifted off, as if she were thinking of faraway places. Over the next few days, I visited her often, at her request. We talked about many things, her empire, her people, her life as a queen. And slowly I began to see her not just as an alien ruler, but as someone who was trying to navigate the complexities of leadership and loneliness. And then, one day, she said something that would change everything. We were sitting in her recovery chamber, talking as we usually did. Lyara had grown stronger with each passing day, her silver skin regaining its radiant glow, and her eyes sparkled with a new vitality. Yet, there was still a distance in her gaze, a kind of longing that I couldn't quite place. "Doctor," she began, her voice steady but soft, "do you ever wonder about what it means to lead? To have the weight of an entire world on your shoulders?" I thought for a moment before answering. "I've never had that kind of responsibility," I admitted, "but I imagine it's not easy." Lyara nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's not," she said quietly, "especially when you are expected to be strong all the time, when you are never allowed to show weakness." There was something in her tone that made me pause. This wasn't just idle conversation. There was something deeper beneath her words, something personal. "I've spent my entire life being told that my purpose is to rule, to protect my people, and to expand the empire," she continued, her voice growing quieter. "But in doing so, I've had to give up so much. I've had to give up myself." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Here was this powerful queen, someone who commanded respect and authority across galaxies, admitting that she had lost herself in the process of fulfilling her duties. "I never asked to be queen," she said, her violet eyes locking onto mine. "It was a role I was born into, a role I couldn't escape. And now, after everything that's happened, I'm not sure I want it anymore." I was stunned by her confession. Liara, the queen of an empire, didn't want to rule anymore? It seemed impossible, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Leadership, especially at her level, was a burden few could understand. And with the near-death experience she had just gone through, it was no wonder that she was questioning everything. "Do you think you could leave it behind?" I asked, my voice tentative. "Could you walk away from the empire?" Liara smiled, but it was a sad smile. "I don't know," she said. "My people need me. Without me, there would be chaos. But sometimes I wonder what it would be like to live a life of my own choosing, to be free from the weight of the crown." There was a vulnerability in her words that I hadn't expected. She wasn't just a queen, she was a person. Someone who longed for freedom, for a life beyond the palace walls. As we sat in silence, I realized something. I had grown to care for Liara, not just as a patient, but as a person. She was more than an alien queen to me now. She was someone who had faced immense pressure and responsibility, someone who had been forced to make sacrifices that most people couldn't even imagine. And now, she was opening up to me in a way that she probably hadn't with anyone else. It was a rare moment of vulnerability, one that I knew I couldn't take for granted. "I don't know what your future holds," I said quietly, "but I do know that you deserve to live the life you want. You've given so much to your people. Maybe it's time you did something for yourself." Liara looked at me, her eyes softening. "Perhaps," she said, "but leaving the empire isn't so simple. There are many who would see my departure as a sign of weakness, and there are those who would seize power in my absence." Her words made sense. Liara wasn't just the ruler of a small kingdom, she was the queen of an empire that spanned entire galaxies. Her power was absolute, but that also meant that there were many who would be eager to take her place. But as I sat there, listening to her speak, I couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, there was a way for her to find the balance she was seeking. The next few days were filled with quiet moments of reflection. Liara continued to recover, and each day she grew stronger, both physically and emotionally. But the conversations we had were beginning to change. They were no longer just about her empire or her role as queen. They were about something deeper, something more personal. One evening, as we sat together, Liara asked me a question that I wasn't prepared for. "Doctor," she began, her voice calm but serious, "what would you do if you were in my position? If you had the power to rule an empire, but it meant sacrificing your own happiness, would you still do it?" I took a deep breath, unsure of how to answer. It was a difficult question, one that I had never really considered. The idea of ruling an empire was so far removed from my own life that it seemed almost impossible to imagine. "I don't know," I admitted. "I think it would depend on what I valued more, my duty to others or my own happiness." Liara nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That's the dilemma I face every day," she said quietly. "I've spent my entire life putting my people first, but now, after everything that's happened, I'm not sure if I continue to do that." There was a heaviness in her words, a sense of resignation that I hadn't heard from her before. It was clear that the events of the past few weeks had changed her. She wasn't the same queen who had been brought to Earth, gravely injured and in need of my help. She was someone who had been forced to confront her own mortality, and in doing so, she had begun to question everything she thought she knew about herself. "I think you have to ask yourself what you really want," I said gently. "What kind of life do you want to live? And is it possible to find a balance between your duty to your people and your own happiness?" Liara looked at me, her violet eyes searching mine. "I don't know," she said softly, "but I do know that I can't keep living the way I have been. I can't keep sacrificing myself for the sake of the empire." Her words struck a chord with me. I had spent my entire career as a doctor, helping others and putting their needs above my own. But hearing Liara speak, I realized that even the most selfless people deserve to have a life of their own. "Maybe it's time for a change," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Maybe it's time for you to start living for yourself." Liara smiled, a small, sad smile. "Perhaps," she said. "But the question is, how do I do that?" It was a question that neither of us had an answer to. Liara's life was bound by the expectations of her people, by the weight of the crown she wore. And while she longed for freedom, she knew that walking away from her responsibilities would have far-reaching consequences. But as we continued to talk, I realized something. Lyra didn't have to choose between her people and her happiness. She didn't have to give up one for the other. There had to be a way for her to find a balance, to rule with compassion and strength, while also finding the freedom she so desperately craved. And as we sat there, under the dim light of the recovery chamber, I made a decision. "I'll help you," I said, my voice steady. "I'll help you find a way to be the queen your people need, without losing yourself in the process." Lyra looked at me, her eyes wide with surprise. "You would do that?" "Yes," I said firmly. "You don't have to do this alone." For a moment, she didn't say anything, and then slowly a smile spread across her face, a real, genuine smile, one that lit up the entire room. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for believing in me." Over the next several weeks, Lyra and I worked together, trying to figure out a way for her to balance her responsibilities as queen with her own personal desires. It wasn't easy. There were so many political and cultural factors at play, so many expectations placed on her shoulders. But Lyra was determined, and I was determined to help her. We spent hours discussing her empire, her people, and the challenges she faced as their ruler. I learned more about the Eslor than I ever thought possible. Their customs, their values, their history. But more importantly, I learned about Lyra herself. She was strong, yes, but she was also kind, thoughtful, and deeply compassionate. She cared about her people in ways that I hadn't fully understood before. She wasn't just ruling for the sake of power, she was ruling because she believed in the greater good. And yet, she had lost herself in the process. As we worked, I found myself growing closer to her. Our conversations became less formal, more personal. We laughed together, shared stories from our respective worlds, and slowly but surely, a bond began to form between us. It was a bond that went beyond just doctor and patient, beyond just queen and subject. It was something deeper, something neither of us had expected. One evening, as we sat together in her chamber, Lyra turned to me with a look of quiet intensity. "Doctor," she began, her voice soft but serious. "I've been thinking." "About what?" I asked, curious. She hesitated for a moment, as if unsure of how to continue. "About you," she said finally. "About us." Her words caught me off guard. "Us?" I repeated, unsure of what she meant. Lyra nodded, her gaze steady. "Yes, you've done more for me than just save my life. You've helped me find myself again, and in doing so, you've become important to me." I stared at her, my heart racing in my chest. I wasn't sure what to say, wasn't sure how to respond to what she was telling me. But I knew one thing. Lyra had become important to me too, more important than I had realized. "Lyra," I began slowly, choosing my words carefully. I care about you, a lot, more than I probably should." Her expression softened, and she reached out to take my hand. "You don't have to explain," she said quietly. "I feel the same way." For a moment, we sat there in silence, the weight of our unspoken feelings hanging between us. It was a complicated situation, one that neither of us had anticipated. Lyra was a queen, a ruler of an entire empire, and I was just a human doctor, someone who had been thrown into her world by chance. But despite the differences between us, despite the challenges we faced, I couldn't deny what I felt for her. It wasn't just admiration or respect, it was something more, something deeper. "Do you think this could ever work?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lyra's gaze softened, and she smiled, a small, hopeful smile. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I'm willing to try." Her words sent a surge of warmth through me, and I felt a flicker of hope ignite in my chest. Maybe this was crazy, maybe it was impossible, but if Lyra was willing to take a chance, then so was I. "I'm with you," I said firmly. "Whatever happens, I'm with you." Lyra's smile grew wider, and she squeezed my hand gently. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." As the days passed, Lyra and I continued to navigate the complexities of our relationship. It wasn't easy. There were so many factors at play, so many challenges we had to face. But we were determined to make it work, no matter what. One of the biggest challenges was the secrecy surrounding our relationship. Lyra's advisors and her people couldn't know about us. Not yet, at least. If they found out that their queen was involved with a human, it could cause political turmoil on a scale that neither of us could control. But despite the secrecy, Liara and I found moments of peace and happiness. We would steal away to quiet corners of the facility, away from prying eyes, where we could talk freely and be ourselves. It was in those moments that I saw the real Liara, not the queen, not the ruler, but the woman behind the crown. She was kind, thoughtful, and full of life. And the more time I spent with her, the more I realized just how much she meant to me. It wasn't just a passing infatuation or a temporary connection. It was something real, something that had the potential to change both of our lives forever. But as much as we tried to stay in the moment, there was always the looming question of what would happen next. Liara couldn't stay on Earth forever, and I couldn't go with her to the Eslor Empire. We were from two different worlds, both literally and figuratively. And while we had managed to build something special between us, we knew that it couldn't last forever. One evening, as we sat together in the recovery chamber, Liara broached the subject that we had both been avoiding. "We need to talk about the future," she said quietly, her gaze fixed on the floor. I nodded, knowing exactly what she meant. "I know," I said softly. "We can't keep doing this forever." Liara looked up at me, her violet eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "I don't want to leave you," she admitted, "but I have responsibilities. My people need me, and I can't abandon them." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I had known from the beginning that this day would come, that Liara would eventually have to return to her empire, but knowing it didn't make it any easier. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice filled with uncertainty. Liara hesitated for a moment before answering. "I don't know," she said softly, "but I do know that I don't want this to be the end. I want to find a way to stay connected, even if we can't be together all the time." Her words sent a surge of hope through me. Maybe there was a way to make this work, even if we couldn't be together in the traditional sense. Maybe there was a way to bridge the gap between our worlds. "I want that too," I said, my voice steady. "I don't want to lose you, Liara," she smiled, a sad, wistful smile. "I don't want to lose you either," she whispered. For a moment, we sat in silence, both of us grappling with the reality of our situation. It wasn't going to be easy. There were so many obstacles in our way, so many things that could go wrong. But despite all of that, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't ready to give up on what we had. As the days turned into weeks, we continued to search for a solution, a way to maintain our connection, even after Liara returned to her empire. It wasn't going to be easy, but we were both determined to make it work. And as we faced the challenges ahead, I realized something important. Love wasn't just about being together physically. It was about supporting each other, no matter the distance or the obstacles in our way. It was about finding a way to make things work, even when the odds were against us. And in that moment, I knew that Liara and I would find a way, no matter what. The time was drawing near for Liara to return to her homeworld. Her recovery had gone exceptionally well, thanks in part to the technology of her people and the medical care she received here on Earth. But more than that, it was clear that her emotional recovery had also made a difference. Our bond had helped her find a new sense of purpose, and while the path ahead was uncertain, she was ready to face it. One afternoon, as we sat together in the quiet of the recovery chamber, Liara turned to me with a serious expression. "Doctor," she began, her voice steady, "I've made a decision." I looked at her, my heart pounding in my chest. "What is it?" I asked, bracing myself for whatever she was about to say. "I've decided that I will return to my people," she said, her tone resolute. "But I'm not going to be the same queen I was before. I've learned so much from my time here about compassion, about vulnerability, and about love, and I want to rule with those values in mind." Her words filled me with a mixture of pride and sadness. I was proud of her for finding a new sense of purpose, but at the same time, I knew that this meant the end of our time together. "I think that's the right choice," I said quietly, my voice filled with emotion. "Your people need you, Liara, and I know you'll be a great queen." She smiled, a soft, genuine smile that warmed my heart. "Thank you," she said. "But I also want you to know that I won't forget what we've shared. You've changed me, Doctor, and no matter how far apart we are, I will always carry you with me." Her words hit me like a wave, and I felt a lump form in my throat. This was it. the moment I had been dreading, the moment when we would have to say goodbye. "I'll never forget you either," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You've changed me too." For a long moment we sat in silence, the weight of our unspoken feelings hanging between us. And then, slowly, Liara reached out and took my hand, her touch gentle but firm. "I don't know what the future holds," she said softly, "but I do know that I want to keep you in my life, even if we can't be together in the way we want." Her words filled me with a flicker of hope. Maybe this wasn't the end after all. Maybe there was a way for us to stay connected, even if we couldn't be together in the traditional sense. "I want that too," I said quietly. "I want to keep you in my life." Liara's smile grew wider, and for a moment, everything felt right. We didn't have all the answers, and the future was still uncertain, but we had each other, and that was enough for now. In the days that followed, Liara and I spent as much time together as we could, cherishing the moments we had left. We talked about our plans for the future, about how we would stay in touch, even across the vast distances of space. It wasn't going to be easy, but we were both committed to making it work. And then, the day finally came. Liara's people had come to retrieve her, to take her back to the Eslor Empire. The time for goodbye had arrived. As we stood together, just before she boarded her ship, Liara turned to me with one final smile. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with warmth, "for everything." I smiled back, my heart aching. "Thank you, Liara," I said quietly, "for changing my life." And with that, she stepped onto her ship, and I watched as it disappeared into the sky, leaving me standing alone on the ground below. But as I stood there, watching the stars, I knew that this wasn't the end. Liara and I had formed a bond that transcended distance and time, and no matter where she went or what challenges lay ahead, I knew that we would always be connected. After Liara's departure, life returned to a strange sense of normalcy. I went back to my work as a doctor, treating patients and dealing with the everyday challenges that came with the job. But things weren't the same. How could they be? I had just spent weeks with an alien queen, someone who had shown me a world beyond anything I could have imagined. But more than that, I had learned something important about myself. I had always prided myself on being a good doctor, someone who was dedicated to helping others. But my time with Liara had shown me that being a healer wasn't just about treating physical injuries. It was about understanding the whole person, their fears, their hopes, and their vulnerabilities. Liara had taught me that compassion was just as important as skill. And I carried that lesson with me in every patient I treated, in every life I touched. But even though I had returned to my normal life, I couldn't stop thinking about Liara. I missed her more than I expected, and there were days when the longing to see her again was almost unbearable. I would find myself staring up at the night sky, wondering where she was, what she was doing, and if she was thinking about me too. And then, one evening, something unexpected happened. I was sitting alone in my apartment, going over some medical notes, when I heard a soft chime from my communication device, a device that I had been given by Liara's people before she left. It was a direct link to her, something we had set up so that we could stay in touch. I quickly answered, my heart racing with anticipation. "Liara?" I asked, my voice filled with hope. The screen flickered for a moment, and then, there she was. Her silver skin glowed softly in the dim light, and her violet eyes sparkled with the warmth I had come to love. "Doctor," she said, her voice smooth and melodic, just as I remembered. "It's good to see you." I smiled, my heart swelling with joy. "It's good to see you too," I said softly. "How are you?" Liara's smile grew wider. "I'm well," she said. "Things are still complicated here, but I've been working on some changes. I've been ruling with more compassion, just as you suggested, and it's making a difference." Her words filled me with pride. "I knew you could do it," I said, my voice filled with admiration. Liara's gaze softened, and for a moment, the distance between us seemed to disappear. "I miss you," she said quietly, more than I expected. "I miss you too," I admitted. "Every day." For a moment, neither of us said anything. We just stared at each other, the weight of our feelings hanging between us. And then, finally, Liara spoke again. "I don't know when we'll be able to see each other in person again," she said softly, "but I want you to know that I'm always thinking of you. No matter how far apart we are, you'll always be with me." Her words sent a warmth through me, and I felt my heart swell with emotion. "I feel the same way," I said quietly. "You'll always be with me too." And in that moment, I knew that our bond was unbreakable. No matter the distance, no matter the challenges we faced, we were connected in a way that went beyond space and time. As we continued to talk, I realized that while Lyara and I couldn't be together in the traditional sense, our connection was something special. It was something worth holding on to, something that would continue to grow, no matter where our lives took us. And as the conversation came to an end, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Lyara had changed my life in ways I hadn't expected, and I knew that I had changed hers too. Our story wasn't over. It was just beginning.